Last time we talked about Jungian psychology and Carl Jung's model of the psyche. Specifically, we talked about the consciousness, which is conscious awareness, and that's the location of our ego. And we talked also about the personal unconscious, which is sort of where we have our complexes and usually things that we don't want to acknowledge. And then also the collective unconscious, which Jung sees as sort of some the unconscious that is available to everybody. It's where the universal myths and patterns of behavior and so on um, are to be found. So, to connect this to science, well, I mean, psychology is a science, don't get me wrong, but let's say to connect this to physics, there was a period of time when Carl Jung was meeting with Wolfgang Pauli, and Pauli went to him because, he was a well-known psychologist, and Pauli is a well-known physicist, very famous actually in physics. So over a period of time, they discussed the collective unconscious. They sort of both agreed that the way we get to know the information in the collective unconscious is through synchronicities. And there was a very large amount of agreement between the two and quite a lot of development, I'm sure, of maybe Jung's psychology, but definitely of Pauli's understanding in physics. So there's sort of an obvious parallel between the collective unconscious and what we in physics might call the void. The void is sort of empty, but it's also teeming with potential, with energy. So it's sort of like, I guess, like the collective unconscious, but in the collective unconscious, you have it's teeming with psychic energy. So the void would be like the origin of everything in physics, the origin of particles and everything. It's a constant source of energy which sort of underlies everything. So they sort of, came to a lot of the same conclusions from their meetings. So let's have a look at particles and let's see how this idea of consciousness underlying everything could have any sort of relevance for particles. And maybe let's start with bigger particles, not particles. Let's start with like humans, right? And think about how did we get here? The process of evolution. So it used to be thought, and it probably still is thought in many circles, that evolution is simply the result of random mutations, and then like where the organism can survive if it can adapt to its environment. The organism that is best adapted to its environment will be the one that survives. So if you have a beneficial mutation, then that's why the mutant organism survives. But it's almost sort of like a tautology, and evolution it happens because um, an organism that's better suited to its environment survives. That's sort of, you don't really understand anything from that. It's sort of obvious. And so um, it doesn't really tell us anything. So then this was sort of looked at by Alfred North Whitehead, and proposed that we should think of reason in two different ways. Reason is like we want to understand everything, right? That's our intellectual capacity to understand. But there's also the reason of what do we do next, right? Reason helps us to know what do we do next? How do we make our life better? How do we change our environment so as to suit us? Because it's true, once you get to the higher animals, they actually change their environment, right? We don't just adjust to our environment. So evolution takes on a different form than what was used to explain the gradual random mutation. And so this idea of reason then means that there is some sort of higher quality that we would automatically put into our mind. We would say that is part of our mind. And so then how does that correspond as you go down um, through, humans, animals, plants, and then the relatively inanimate world? So I would say that most scientists would say there's a complete differentiation between living organisms and non-living objects. But basically, if you think of this capacity of reason, it's an internal capacity, a capacity of our consciousness and our mind. So that, how does that suddenly emerge out of inert particles, out of inert matter? It couldn't. It makes much more sense to think that reason must have been there in sort of a form of an internal urge towards something, right? We and plants and animals and humans are born with an urge to live and to improve our situation. With humans, that's sort of, a really big factor. No matter how happy we are, we always want to be happier. Once we attain a certain level, we don't just sort of stop, we want to move up to the next level. Um, so that urge must have been present even in an elementary particle. Now, it doesn't mean that an elementary particle is reasoning. It means this is the sort of something that develops gradually over time into what we see today. So, an organism wants to attain certain goal, actually, and this is sort of rejected by a lot of biologists and a lot of scientists, but it's the only thing that really makes sense. That we are all sort of we're born with a certain goal. We are formed with a certain goal. And that means that we are participating in our own formation. Um, I don't mean that a baby is necessarily participating in its own formation, but basically the particles that we are a part of, that are a part of us, have built up over a long period of time into what is now a human. So, in that sense, each of the particles has participated in creating a higher organism. And even like a single atom is already quite complicated, quite complex. It's not just one little thing, but there are many particles making up a particular atom. So each of the particles must have made a creative jump at some point from just being a single particle into choosing to be in a relationship and eventually in a relationship that results in the existence of an atom. So everything chooses in some way, not in the way that we choose, but through manifesting its own nature to make creative jumps to become something more. So there is creativity even in inert, what we think of as inert matter is not anywhere near as inert as we have always thought. And that means that even particles are participating in some way, are receiving information in some way from the collective unconscious, from the universal field of consciousness that underlies everything and everybody. Okay, more next time.